stories have incredible histories. I mean, stores tell the stories of trends and customers. Neighborhoods are rich histories of families and traditions. Schools are textbooks of their students and childhood and the things we've learned about culture and our history. We all have a story. You have a story, I have a story, just like this church building behind me that's housed a number of different congregations and was burned out by a lightning strike a couple decades ago, but its story wasn't done. But when it was designed, the architect was sure to put all of these stones exactly where he wanted them. All the stones needed to be exactly in their right place so you could build this beautiful church. Again, we're no different. You were designed with that same care and compassion and intention. You were designed on purpose, not by accident, not by flaw. The writer of Genesis says that when God created humans, God said, "Let us create them in our image." You are made in the image of God. You are made to reflect God's love, God's compassion, God's image, God's justice in the world. That is the image that you reflect. You weren't made on accident. You weren't made with fatal flaws or imperfections. The God who knit you together, who put you together, did so on purpose. But we don't always feel that way. I mean, that's not the story life always tells us. I mean, we take risks, we try new things only to fall flat on our faces sometimes. We can feel incredibly alone while everybody around us feels like they have friends and loved ones at every corner, followers for days, when we feel like no one would care what's going on with us. We might be made in the image of God, perfect and without flaw, but that doesn't mean that there aren't days that we don't feel scuffed and bruised, broken by the day-to-day of life. So there was a guy in the Bible named Paul, and Paul, he got this. He talked about it this way. He described people like clay jars. Now, clay jars back in Paul's time, 2,000 years ago, were just jars that you would use to carry things in. And they probably weren't like your nicest things, because clay was really, really good for transporting stuff or holding stuff, much like our Tupperware is, like in your fridge. But clay jars, they were kind of fragile. They might break. They got scratched and scuffed all the time. Paul was saying, like, we're like clay jars, that we are good for carrying things, but sometimes we can be fragile. We can be broken. We're capable of getting some bumps and bruises. But Paul's story about these clay jars wasn't actually about the jars. It was about what they carried. Paul said, we're like clay jars who carry a treasure. And it's because we're clay jars that the treasure can shine. Like, here's the thing. Paul imagined that we were people who carry around God's love in us, God's image in us, but that would never shine out. That would never shine out to the people around us if there weren't cracks in the clay. The treasure inside wouldn't get out. You couldn't ever see it if there weren't some broken spots in the jars. The same is true of God's love and God's image in us. It shines through us. The Japanese have an art form called kintsugi. And kintsugi is the practice of taking jars or pots that have cracks, and they fill in those cracks in the pottery with a paste made of pure gold. And the idea is that the pottery actually gets more beautiful and more valuable when it has cracks filled with gold. And they fill the cracks in with this gold because they think that the cracks are what make this pottery beautiful. The cracks are part of the story of these jars, this pottery. The cracks tell the story, and the gold fills it in to show how valuable those cracks are. Your value, your worth, your ability to be loved is not defined by your perfection. It's not defined by your accomplishments, what travel team you made, or your A pluses or your C minuses. It's not about who you're dating or who you're hanging out with. Your ability to love, to be loved, Your value, your worth is defined because you are someone who carries a treasure within you. You are someone made to reflect the image of God within you. That is our value, that is our worth, and there's nothing that gets to take that away. You carry a treasure within you. You carry the fingerprints of God's love. You carry the reflection of God's justice and compassion and intention within you. And you have the Holy Spirit within you pushing you towards this mission that God has invited you towards. And it's in our cracks, in our brokenness, that shines out. It's in our brokenness that God's love shines all the more. I mean, even the nicest houses, the biggest mansions have holes in the walls. We just call them windows. And the funny thing about windows is if there were no windows in a house, the light would never get in. Natural light would never shine if there weren't holes in the walls. In our brokenness is when God's perfection, God's love shines out. You are made on purpose. You were made with love. You are God's masterpiece. It doesn't matter if you've got some bumps and bruises, some scuffs along the way. You are God's beloved. And life might try to tell you you're not smart enough, you're not athletic enough, you're not cool enough, you're not attractive enough, all these things, and Jesus would just say, you are enough. God's love is enough. You were made to reflect God's love, and you do. No sin, no shame, no disappointments, no failures gets to take that away. Much like this church behind us that once was this beautiful building with a beautiful roof and pews inside, it got destroyed by lightning and it's become something all the more beautiful. You reflect the image of God, and it's in our brokenness that we reflect it all the more beautifully.